I call the third business session back into order.
Madam President,
Sergeant at Arms.
we have a distinguished guest joining us today. National Guard Association of the United States Chairman of the Board, Major General Donald Dunbar.
Sergeant at Arms, please have the distinguished guest escorted to the head table.
Major General Donald Dunbar is Wisconsin's Adjutant General. He commands the Wisconsin National Guard. He was elected as the chairman of the National Guard of the Association of the United States Board of Directors. He has commanded at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey twice while supporting ops, Iraqi freedom, and enduring freedom.
General Dunbar, the podium's all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Well, it's great to be with you here in God's country, as someone said. I know a little bit about God's country being from Wisconsin, but I think Iowa is also God's country. That's a good thing. Is that me?
I think it's outside.
Try something different. So I'm reminded of a story of, I used to fly B-52s, and I'm reminded of a story of a bomber crew in World War II. And the pilot was showing up for the first time with the crew, and he sits into the seat. He looks at the navigator, takes out his .38 and puts it on the instrument panel. And he says, "You know what that's for?" And the navigator's a little sheepish, and he says, "No, sir, I don't know what that's for." He goes, "That's for navigators that get me lost." Navigator pauses for a few seconds, then reaches into his bag and pulls out his .45 and puts it on the chart table. And the pilot said, "What's that for?" He goes, "Well, sir, I'm pretty sure I'm going to know we're lost before you do." So I don't want to get lost. I only have 15 minutes. I want to stay on track here. But I want to tell you, my name's Dunbar. I'm a guardsman. You know what I love about the National Guard? Everything. And it's my privilege to be the Adjutant General of Wisconsin and the Chairman of the Board for the National Guard Association. I want to talk about in August, but before I do that, I got to give some context. This is my scrapbook. I don't really show slides. I show pictures to try and articulate the point I want to make. The first one I want to make is that we can never lose perspective on who we are. I get the opportunity to talk to leaders of Congress periodically and business leaders across the country, and they'll ask me, "Well, so tell me about this National Guard." So it's kind of like an elevator speech. And so I use the Minuteman right up here, and I talk about, on a bad night in America, you can count on the National Guard. We're going to set aside our plow and pick up our musket, and we're going to do something about it. And not everybody's a farmer, but we all have a plow. Whether you're working for a police department or a fire department, or you're working as a lawyer or a doctor, whatever it might be, we set that plow aside. We pick up our musket. It may not be a rifle like an 11 Bravo. It might be a truck driver. It might be somebody on a keyboard, somebody on an F-35. But we're going to pick up our musket and do something about it. It's the foundation of our nation's defense. Sometimes people will say to me, "You know, you keep talking about the Constitution when you talk about the National Guard," and they'll say, "It's a long time ago." I've actually heard senior leaders testify before Congress and get asked about the National Guard, and they'll say, "Well, you know, 1789 is a long time ago." And I think, wow, you know, it's a document we took an oath to. Now, my state was formed in 1848. Our Guard started in 1837. That's the first. On the left side, you see some guardsmen who fought in the Civil War. That's the first engagement we were involved in for this nation. So have we changed? Sure, we've changed. Now we've got modern equipment. F-16s are converting to F-35s. We've got KC-135s. We have our soldiers. We have an infantry brigade. It's changed dramatically, just like our Army and Air Force has. But the heart and soul of Wisconsin hasn't changed, nor has her National Guard, nor has the National Guard across the 54. We are still the primary combat reserve of the Army and the Air Force, and we're the first military responder in the homeland. I could talk for hours about this chart. I won't. The big thing I want to highlight for you is that we serve with 3 hats: civilian, Guard, active duty. The vast majority of our time, we are civilians, as the Secretary was just talking about. When we're in uniform, most of the time we're in the National Guard, and occasionally we're called forth to the active duty. When that happens, we leave our service in the state's National Guard, we go into the Army and the Air Force, and we serve with honor and distinction. When that is complete, we are released from active duty, returned to the National Guard. Every member of the National Guard is 100% American soldier, 100% American airman. But ladies and gentlemen, we are more. We are the National Guard. No other branch of the service stands ready to answer the call at home the way the National Guard does, and stands ready to answer our President's call to the Army or the Air Force when something happens around the world that requires America's military to do something about it. We're the best battle buddy the Army ever had. We're the best wingman the Air Force ever had. So here we sit. Thank you. Sometimes people will make the distinction. They'll say, well, you know, the National Guard's not a professional force. And what they mean is the National Guard's not full-time like the Army or the Air Force. Fair enough, we're not a full-time force. That's a good thing. It's a value for the country. But make no mistake about it, we are a professional force. We are professionally trained. We are professionally ready. Our National Guard is ready to move out tonight if required. Thank you. We are ready to go. So, let me transition here to NAUGUS. If we're a professional force and we don't get involved in the business of lobbying, which we don't because we're professional men and women in uniform, who does that for us? Right? It's got to be somebody that understands you. This is a complicated business that we're in. It's not just as simple as walking into Congress and saying, hey, we think the Guard needs more rifles. You have to understand what the National Guard is all about, and that's why I am so proud of what the National Guard Association of the United States and EANGUS does for the National Guard. They go and do for us what we don't do. They lobby. Now, people sometimes hear the word lobby and they go, oh man, it's beneath me, don't want to lobby, don't want to do that. And I just have a different opinion. Our country was formed by creating a government that was accessible to the people. And having somebody who goes and understands who you are, and the men and women who work at NAUGUS and EANGUS have worn the uniform and understand the walk that we walk in our uniforms as guardsmen. And they go to Capitol Hill and they advocate. Because Congress is going to appropriate funds for the defense of this country, and they're going to determine where that money goes. And let's be honest, I'm not being critical, but the Army or the Air Force doesn't give us money. They give us the money that Congress says they have to give us. And to be fair, if Congress gave us all the money, we might give less to the active duty, you know? That's just the way people are sometimes. But if you're going to go and tell a story, you have to understand what you're talking about, and NAUGUS understands what they're talking about. So let me tell you about our priorities for this year. And some people might be thinking, well, where do I find these priorities? Well, we have a magazine you're familiar with. It's called NAUGUS. We sent this magazine out a few months ago. We got a card right in it. It lists our priorities for 2020. I'll just hit a few highlights. Concurrent proportional fielding of things like the Apache, the C-130J, the F-35, the KC-46. We believe to be a primary combat reserve, you got to be ready to go into the fight tonight. You can't wait for equipment in the future. We're talking about TRICARE. We're talking about tax incentives for our employers, the very point that the Secretary just made. Modernization and recapitalization of our legacy systems. This is important for us. Improved mental care access. Early retirement credit for 12304 Bravo, and you can read the rest right here. Now, you might be thinking, those are pretty good. You might be fooled into thinking I'm doing a good job as chairman because we have these great standing resolutions. Well, the truth of the matter is, while they're my resolutions as a member of NAUGUS, they're not my resolutions as a chairman because we are a grassroots organization. And where do these resolutions come from? They come from the state associations. They come from individual guardsmen who get together at a state conference and they They coalesce and they talk and they think, you know what, we need more C-130Js. Let's talk about that. And then they put forth a recommendation. And if the state thinks it's a good idea and they adopt it, it gets sent to the national conference. And all of us at our national conference, just like you're having one here in Iowa, we're going to have one in a few weeks in Denver, and we vote on these state-driven grassroots recommendations. And if they're voted on successfully, they become part of our standing resolution, and it's that very group of resolutions that are listed on our webpage that EANGUS takes to Capitol Hill and says, this is what our membership thinks we need. Army doesn't do it, Air Force doesn't do it, Guard Bureau doesn't do it, our membership does it. We are a grassroots organization.
What have you done for me lately? Ooh, yeah.
So I can hear what you're thinking. Sure, you're talking about the Constitution, talking about all these things. Are we relevant? So what has EANGUS done? Then you might ask, what has EANGUS done? Well, quite a bit, actually. You may have heard this, maybe you missed it, but there was a time when our directors of the Air and Army National Guard were lowly major generals just like me. Now they're three-star general officers, recognizing the contribution of our members, recognizing the contribution of our National Guard across the 54. How'd that happen? Advocacy on Capitol Hill. You may remember this, maybe you don't, but there was a time when our chief had 3 stars. If you've met General Langell, you notice he's got 4 stars. Count them 4. And he sits on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That didn't just happen one day in Washington, D.C. because somebody had a bright idea. It came from our membership, it came from our associations who argued on behalf of the National Guard that these are things that we ought to do. And if you want to know some other things we've done, on the same card I talked about, we list our accomplishments on the other side. Let me just share a couple with you. $421 million for the National Guard Army and for the National Guard Air, $421 million each in NGRIA funds. New Black Hawk M model helicopters, upgraded our Humvees, 6 brand new Apache helicopters, 8 C-130J aircraft. The list goes on. The full list is right there. It's available in the magazine. It's extraordinary what our associations have done for us. I'm a member of a lot of associations, AUSA, AFA, I believe in all of them, but none of them represents me as a guardsman the way that EANGUS and EANGUS do for our body. That's just a fact. We also have in the National Guard Association this thing called the Education Foundation that I'm very proud of. We tell the National Guard story nationwide. We have a museum at the Memorial Building in Washington, D.C. If you haven't been there, please go one day. It's extraordinary. You can walk through there and see our story told with care and precision, and you can't help but walk out of there feeling the pride of who the National Guard is. It's extraordinary. We run a foundation where men and women and businesses contribute to this association. It's called the Legions de Lafayette. You have to spend at least $10,000 to earn that title. And there's a board out front that talks about who has contributed that money. That's a lot of commitment, a lot of people. Now you might think, well, why would someone do that? It's because they believe in what the National Guard is. And I'm not bragging, but I'll share with you, I've done that because I believe in what the National Guard does for this nation. We also have a monument. I was just in Normandy a few weeks ago for the 75th anniversary with our president, Roy Robinson, who's sitting right back here. And we had the privilege of rededicating that monument. I was so proud to stand there and make a few comments. And we're in the process of developing a video that's going to tell the National Guard story, and then we're going to give it to the state associations for free and let the states decide if they want to tell the state unique story in addition to that national story we're going to tell. The National Guard Association represents the National Guard, and I'm proud of what they do. So let me close by quoting that great poet from New Jersey. You guys know who I'm talking about, right? Bruce Springsteen. So the boss wrote a song called Long Walk Home, and I won't sing it, but he put this stanza together. He said, my father said, son, we're lucky in this town. it's a beautiful place to be born. It just wraps its arms around you. Nobody crowds you. Nobody goes it alone. And the flag flying over the courthouse means certain things are set in stone. Who we are, what we'll do, and what we won't. End quote. Well, you know what's set in stone? The Constitution of the United States, our law matters, and the National Guard is part of that foundational document. We are the foundation of our nation's defense. What we will do is the same thing we've been doing since 1636, answer the call of our nation, and we will never, ever forget that we are a National Guard of state militaries ready to join our Army and the Air Force when needed and defend this great republic. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. I appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General Dunbar, for those great comments, and we always appreciate having you, our partner at EANGUS, here with us at the conference, and so I'd like to present you with our EANGUS conference coin. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Sergeant at Arms, please have our distinguished guests escorted from the table.